First of all, welcome. Boker Tov, Haverim. Good to see everybody's Punim. Welcome, welcome. Give a big lunch and learn, JFed welcome to Linda Lynton, who is an artist extraordinaire, and she's going to be sharing her stuff. Take it away, Linda.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Linda Lynton. I'm an environmental artist, and I'm talking about a particular project I did 18 months ago now. But I was asked to do a solo show in Kingston, and I decided to make the show about a river that happens to flow through my neighborhood. I live in Woodstock, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with Woodstock, but whenever you visit Woodstock, especially if you're walking, maybe when you're driving, you wouldn't notice so much, you're always crossing bridges. And I moved up here, and I bought a weekend home here in 2007 and moved up here permanently about 5 years ago. But the moment I got my weekend home, I just started to notice that this river was everywhere, and very interesting. And I'm going to show you first of all. Wait a minute, share. Sorry, I'm a bit slow on this. This is just a map to show where the river is, so that you get a broad idea. It's 20 miles long. It's called the Sawkill River. Some people call it the Sawkill Creek, because it's really only a river at the end. It starts in the mountains. The Woodstock Valley abuts the Catskill Mountains, and the green on this map that you see at the top is all wilderness area, and that's the high mountains. And it starts in a little glacial lake called Echo Lake, and that's about 2,000 feet up in the mountains. There is one way to go, which is the hiking trail, and it's a tough hiking trail. Well, when I was much fitter than I am now because of COVID, we're all out of shape, aren't we? It was a difficult hike even then. It's a steep and nasty hike, but it's well worth it, and I'll talk more about that later. Anyway, this map is just to give you an idea. It starts at that lake in the high mountains, but over 2,000 feet, cascades down to the Woodstock Valley. The Woodstock is about 600 feet above sea level, and then it goes down to the Esopus River, which is the big river that goes through Kingston, and via Socrates, it empties into the Hudson. This river is about 20 miles long. Now, this is why I got interested. The house I bought for my weekend home, about 3 houses further along, there was a bridge, and there was this. This is the summer, and this is the Sawkill River in the summer when it's a drought. This is the same river from the same bridge, looking in the other direction, in the winter. This was taken in November. And as you can see, the mood is different. The feel is different. And because this is the bridge you always cross if you want to take the scenic route and walk to Woodstock from where I lived, I was always crossing that bridge and always seeing that river. And so it became a part of the gestalt of where I was living at the time. And anyway, just going back to the map, I decided I wanted to paint this river from beginning to end, partly because I'm a hiker, so these sort of things kind of seem natural to do. I had to do because, of course, there are 2 major impediments from doing anything like this from beginning to end. First of all, people live along the river. So I had to go and knock on doors and ask people for permission to go and paint in their backyards. And believe it or not, everybody said yes. I didn't have one person say no. And also the other thing about this was the wilderness area. Because I wanted to follow the river, literally we were heading to bushwhack. And there was no way I was going to do that by myself. Anyone who goes hiking, you don't go into a wilderness area alone. So there are various up here, there are various licensed professional trekkers. And they, so I hired a guy named Del Orlowski, and I've got a photo here so you can see. I hired from this professional guide, Del, to accompany me up the river through the wilderness area. And here we're very close to 2,000 feet. If you remember the other photograph, you see how tiny this stream is. And if you're wondering why the boots are off, I don't know how many of you hike, but when you have to cross a river, the simplest thing is just take your boots and socks off, wade through, and then put them on the other side. But anyway, they were the two practical things that I had to do. And just to let you know, whenever I was in someone's backyard, I always came with a bag of goodies. You know, you buy the biscotti, cream cheese, whatever, you know, lots of nice edibles that you probably wouldn't buy for yourself. So, you know, and that, you know, you want to keep people happy, basically. I think it also helped that I'm a middle-aged woman with a British accent. That might also have helped as to why people, because everyone was so friendly and nice. And some of the places I went to weren't particularly nice, put it like that. But, you know, I wanted the view. So, you know, that's. The last thing to say is I'm represented by Emerge Gallery, and you can see the entire collection of these paintings that I did for this project. They're online on a website called Artsy. I had a solo show on Artsy as well after the one in Kingston, and you can see all my work there. Going to start, you can only see the first few paintings here from where we are, and I'm going to go here. I put these paintings, I didn't paint them in this order, obviously, but I put them in sort of geographical order. So this is Echo Lake. It's a marvelous, the hike, if you're up to it, because it really is a tough hike, it's a marvelous place. It's so quiet. It's a glacial lake in the hills. The silence is quite stunning. Of course, now the last time I was there are all these healthy 20-somethings, and they're starting to camp around there, but it hasn't spoiled the solitude. Del and I did the hike through the wilderness. One thing we found, the lake, this is the edge of the lake, and the Sawkill River is coming down from the lake. That lake feeds the river. Something has started to happen. It literally has started. We've got beavers. Beavers are coming back. And it was quite extraordinary seeing they're just starting to build the dams. And you should see the trees. I should have shown you a photograph of it. The number of trees that they're felling. It's really stunning. And it was very exciting, just feeling, you know, that nature's coming back. They're coming back to their land. It's rather lovely. And again, you still get that sense. These colors are very real to the area. I mean, one thing as a professional artist, especially when you're a landscape artist, you're always concerned with color and getting the color right, because the color influences the mood. And the stillness, you still see the stillness of the lake up there. But then, of course, once you get away from the lake and into the woods, you're getting these rocky environments. And what's extraordinary when you're out there, and you'll see these in the next few paintings, the wilderness painting, is the light again, because the light is green. The light filters through. I was up there in June, and so the leaves still had that spring sense of, you know, what you get in May but lower down, but all the light is green. It's quite extraordinary because there's nothing but trees everywhere. And what's also extraordinary is when the sunlight hits the river, it goes straight through to the sand, and it's always gold. It's quite extraordinary seeing that. So one thing I just want to mention here, these paintings are pretty large. Large paintings like this, I always do in the studio. They're too big. You can't take your equipment. Well, to go into the wilderness, you need a helicopter to airdrop you to start with. I just want to show, I'm just going to take one off. The plein air, there's the other ones that you do at the same time, which are out there, when you're out there, which we call plein air painting. And this is done in the field. And they're usually smaller. And not necessarily this small, I'll show you some larger plein air, but plein air, you always have the landscape painter, you have the studio shots and the studio paintings, which are based on photographs, which you take. I would never use somebody else's photo because it's your vision, your eye. And then the plein air, which is what you do in the field. We come now to, this is one of the waterfalls in the wilderness area. I mean, some of the waterfalls in the wilderness area are absolutely spectacular, as you can imagine. And in fact, this one here is getting that mood. You've got the green light, you've got the running water, you've got the rocks. And a huge number of rocks have moss on them, which of course makes it quite dangerous again for the walking. And in fact, one of the real dangers when you're out in the wilderness area is the leaves. Of course, in the forest, everything is covered by a surface of leaves. And it's very dangerous because they can be hiding really deep holes. And I fell into one hole, but it wasn't too bad, only like 4 feet. But you know, you can have a 10-foot hole because it's one ravine after another. It's really extraordinary. And in fact, by having that professional tracker with me, I learned a few tricks about what to do when you're in these environments. First of all, you don't follow the stream. Or you don't go in the stream to follow because it's too difficult with the rocks. And you stay on the highest ground possible. The other interesting thing about the wilderness area is, and all of the Catskill Mountains, all the forest is new growth forest. Most of the forest you see throughout the Catskills is actually wasn't there in 1947, because really from 1620 onwards, settlers came in and they removed all the forest to farm. And that was one of, can we go back now? One of the big things I had to do, and it was the first farm in the hills at the very edge of the wilderness. This is literally just leaving the wilderness area here. And it was just further, if you look, is the farm, the first farm that you come to when you get out of the wilderness area. Absolutely idyllic. The farmers there have owned, well, they didn't own the land, but they've worked that land since about 1700, but they didn't own it until 1850. You see that when you meet the people, you meet the farmers, because one of the first things I did was go to that farm, because I knew I had to get permission from that farm, because even to get to the wilderness area, I had to go through their land. Oh, and they were sweethearts, real sweethearts. And they told me their history and their whatever. And then I found out other things. In fact, what I discovered later on is, I don't know if you've heard of the artist Thomas Cole, and he was the guy who founded the Hudson River School of Painting. And somewhere around 1820, somewhere in that period, he actually walked up the Sawkill River with the next farm down. They're called the McDougalls. There's a road going through the hills called McDougal Road. And they're the McDougalls. And apparently the McDougal, and it was a woman, back in like 1820, I'm not sure the actual date, but somewhere around 1820, she was a herbalist. And she took Thomas Cole along the Sawkill River, showing him the various plants. So it's kind of neat to think this river has had artists there. Anyway, we go through, you get it stony, and here the next picture here, this one, that one there is Woodstock. I don't know if you drive up from Route 28, you cross into Woodstock, which is the main way of getting into Woodstock. You cross the bridge, and this is what you get. This is the view here. This is a November scene. It's after the fall, it's going into winter. The interesting thing about the whole Woodstock Valley is that it has an industrial past. The Indian name for Woodstock is Wangchuck, and Wangchuck means the Valley of Waterfalls. And as you saw, we've had the waterfalls in the wilderness area, and the waterfalls continue through Woodstock. And because of those waterfalls, Woodstock Village itself had 3 sawmills. And there's some other sawmills lower down. And you'll see something that I painted in a minute about that. In addition, because of the hemlock trees in the forest, hemlock bark is really good for tanning leather. So there are a lot of tanneries all along the river. From everything I've read and discovered, I really think this valley, the Woodstock Valley in the 19th century, was a really disgusting, polluted place. I mean, really unpleasant, from a pollution point of view, and it was industrial. But what was also interesting was by 1900, it was virtually all gone. It's interesting to finding this history out because who knew? Anyway, I want to skip to this painting here because this is the last waterfall on the Sawkill. It's down it's in the Sawkill Valley off Sawkill Road, and obviously I had to paint that one. In a sense, that was the first waterfall there in the wilderness, and this is the very last waterfall. And as you see, it's hardly a waterfall, really. It's more like rapids. When you get below, go beyond Woodstock, you're now getting into the Esopus Valley, and that farmland has been farmed literally since about 1620. Settlers came into the Hudson River Valley very early because of the farmland. So fertile, it's good farmland. And now, when you drive down Sawkill Road, basically, which follows, and it goes for about 5-6 miles, quite a way. You see these beautiful lakes. And as you can see, I know this one, there are these beautiful lakes. They're reservoirs. They're actually reservoirs. The Sawkill got dammed, so they're reservoirs for Kingston drinking water. And these lakes have really glamorous names like Kingston Reservoir number 1, Kingston Reservoir. I think this is Kingston Reservoir number 4. What's exciting about it is we've got bald eagles have come in. And they're nesting actually in trees right over the Sawkill Road. And apparently they're huge. I haven't seen one yet. I keep waiting to see one, but apparently their wingspan is like 6 to 8 feet. They're enormous. So it's exciting. We've got beavers in the wilderness. We've got bald eagles in the valley. Anyway, when you get right down, getting close to I-87, we have the confluence with the Esopus. This was one where I really did have to ask the inhabitant facing all of this if I could paint in their backyard. Everyone was a sweetheart who I heard. What's interesting is there are 2 things about this. That bridge is actually Interstate 87, and you have this stunning bucolic view, and the noise is unbelievable from the traffic. Really, the only thing is we'll have electric cars, so the noise will eventually go away. What I found interesting is to show you, this is the plein air painting I did of the same thing. Sometimes, the mood is different. Whenever you do something from a photograph, it's always going to be more formal. You can't help it. But when you do a plein air, you can capture the mood, sometimes the mood of the moment. And again, here's the highway going across. But visually, it's stunning. It's really beautiful. When I do these big paintings based on photograph, I often will project the photograph, not to get the details, but to get the basic structure. Because one of the weird things I discovered when I started as a landscape painter is, and it's a visual thing, it's obviously to do with the brain, obviously. When you stare at one thing, say I'm just staring at these leaves here, they become really big. It's almost like it enlarges. So you always run the risk that you'll make something in the picture, in the landscape, too large. Simply because your whole mind and your eyes see that one point as much larger than it really is. And so it's really useful just to get a projection, just to get some of the basic things, just something basic. So you're not going to make that mistake, because it's very easy to do. Interesting enough that when you do plein air, that rarely happens because you're having to work so fast. With plein air, you know, you're out there and you've got the mosquitoes and the water spray. With this water spray, mosquitoes weren't so bad, but most of these, but the wind, for some reason, there was always wind. And this is actually the last big waterfall in Woodstock, just outside of Woodstock, and it's the only waterfall that still has the original sawmill, the buildings of the original sawmill. The sawmill stopped working as a sawmill around 1900, 1905, somewhere in that, but they're still there. And this is about 20 feet high. And I tried, the aim with this particular plein air painting was to get that sense of the power of the water coming down. I mean, it's unbelievably noisy, and you know, you can't have a conversation, you really can't. And it's just that power of the water. And in fact, this is one of the exciting things always about doing plein air, because I'll show you the next. This is the other thing about being a landscape painter. I was up at 4 in the morning. I was here at 4:30 because I wanted to get the sunrise on the river. And this is at the farm, you know, on that farmland by the wilderness area, and catching the light of the sunrise. And that was my goal here, was to get that light. One of the big concerns when you are doing plein air is always just getting the colors right. Because the color, if you get that color, everything else follows. And that's the best way of putting it. And then, yeah, the next two, I think maybe move it a bit. The next two, this was a different day, a morning, but not quite as early as that. Because remember, I was doing all of this in June and July. So, you know, sunrise is pretty early. But this is probably about 6 in the morning, something like that. I was at the same spot. I did it one way and then I turned around and did it the other way. And it's just, again, getting that sunlight, the morning sunlight on the trees, in the water, whatever you see. And this one, which here, it's called Red Bank. This was one of the things that I found fascinating when I was out there. Wait a minute, I think that's better. Right, yeah. Was wherever you went, the clay, the Catskills are famous, that their soil is rocks and clay. And there's that whole joke about the Catskills. Every time it rains, you get a fresh crop of stones. But the soil is clay, so it's quite disgusting, you know, muddy and whatever. And most of the clay in the mountains, or certainly in this area, is red. And that was really a bit of a revelation for me, because the first two pictures I ever did, there were pastels of the Sawkill, was when I was living in that weekend home, and I did the rocks. As you can see, I drew them, and you see the water is pink. And that's the extraordinary thing. Every time there's a storm or it's heavy rain, the water in the river turns pink. And I realized why, because all the clay is red. And you notice I accentuated the color of the stones, but the stones seem to vary between being blue, but of course Catskill bluestone, they're red, or they're that gold color. And it's quite extraordinary. Some of the colors are quite stunning. And then there's another one I did of the stones in the river. I mean, I just found that fascinating. But the fact that you see these, you learn a lot about geology when you do something like this. You know, you might be a painter and an artist and you're trying to get the mood of a scene, but the reality is you pick up a lot of stuff, including the fact in some of these boulders you can find fossils of seashells, things like that. These are old mountains. That's basically my take on what I did. And I'll just show you again. You know, these were the paintings, you know, showing going down the river, and then, you know, the plein air. And I'll just go around again just to let you see what. And it's interesting because as a landscape artist, you have these two different worlds in a way. You have the world of plein air when you're outside, and then the world of the studio when you're inside. And I tell you, the plein air is much more daunting. I actually had once a gust of wind coming, and the whole paint palette came right, all my clothes got paint all over them. And of course, it was the day I wasn't wearing my regular stuff, and I was wearing good clothes, of course. Yeah. But anyway, I hope that helped. And if anyone's got questions, fire away.
What type of paint do you use?
Oh, I'm an oil painter. Only oils. They're natural. I regard acrylic and that's plastic. Everything with oils is natural. Linseed oil comes from linseed. The turpentine even comes from pine trees. Most of the paints, even though you get some synthetic paints now, a lot of them literally are clays. Like that red clay probably could be processed and used as paint. And in fact, a lot of paints are, in fact, clays. Definitely an oil painter. The big problem called with an oil painter is you're always waiting for paint to dry. That's, especially when you're in the studio. One of the challenges when you're doing plein air painting, you have a very wet canvas, and you maybe have to climb up a cliff or a ravine or something with this wet canvas to get it to the car, that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm totally oil. Oil on canvas usually, oil on linen, sometimes oil on wood.
For someone like me who can't draw a straight line, who's always, admired people who can do what you do, your work is just so full of life and vibrancy and color. I feel like I'm there. I also, in a strange way, feel like I'm a stalker and you're looking through a window of the studio.
I think we all are, aren't we, though? Yeah, I think that's all of us. I love life. I suppose that's the best way of putting it. I just love life.
It comes through when you work.
Yeah, and the thing, in fact, I want to just show you this one because this has been something that's been in my mind since childhood. Do you see this line of stones with the grass? When I was a young child, and I'm talking like 6 years old, I grew up in the East End of London. This is stones with the one piece of grass coming through. And that for me has been a theme mentally and emotionally my entire life. And the reason is, when I was a little kid, I grew up in the East End of London, and the East End of London was bombed during World War II. It was flattened. So you get these areas, and I remember walking to my grandparents' house, which was, say, a mile away from where my parents lived, and you would see along the sidewalks, you would see these weeds pushing the sidewalk up to grow. And I found it was like a metaphor for life. Whatever, life will prevail. Whatever you put in front there, whatever barrier, life will prevail. And that has always been, I don't know, it's how we all have these images from childhood that somehow, in a way, color how we see the world. And I know that was one of them. It astonished me because a lot of it was asphalt because of the bombing, they couldn't put proper paving stones down, and the asphalt was bulging because these thistles, these are good British thistles, you don't really get the equivalent over here. These thistles were just pushing the asphalt away and growing up. It's wonderful.
Do you name your paintings? Do they have names?
Yeah, I think, oh, well, God, yeah, I name all of them. Do I remember the names? That one with the grass?
Yeah.
It's some name like Hanging On, or it's not Survivor. No, I've got a different painting called Survivor, but it's that kind of name. I'm sorry. It's really bizarre how one really does forget. And sometimes my paintings have 3 different names because it goes into a gallery and the gallery say, "What's the name?" And I thought, "Oh hell."
Gotta write them down. Gotta put them in like a catalog type of, I call my.
Oh yeah. Go on Artsy. Yeah, go on Artsy and you'll find the name.
If I were to name that painting, I would give it a name like Hatikva, which means hope.
Yeah, but it's that sort of thing. It's that constant. In fact, that's something I haven't done yet, but what I do want to do a whole series of pieces of art with this theme. of, you know, I've got the odd painting and drawing throughout my career with this idea, but I haven't done a series, if you know what I mean. And I like painting by series. I like painting by a project. Now, I like doing the river because it was a project, you know, and it had a, you know, sense of beginning. Well, the river has a beginning and an end, and it was only 20 miles long. And it's interesting that so much happened within that 20 miles. You know, it's quite extraordinary.
Rod Stewart had a song. Anybody remember Rod Stewart? Every picture tells a story.
Oh, totally.
I think that was,
Totally.
yeah, yeah.
And when you're doing this, everything you do, in fact, it makes it hard as an artist to throw something away sometimes when you know it's really bad art and it really ought to go, but this is where X, Y, and Z happened. This is what, you know, whatever. And because the other thing about when you're painting a picture as opposed to taking a photograph, you know, I've got photographs of all these things in these areas. When, you know, you can imagine the amount of photographs I took when I was in the wilderness area, because I'm not going to be going back there again. But a photograph is very different. A painting is several things, and you have to be loyal to the integrity of the painting. You know, the painting, first of all, there's the composition. And sometimes you have to tweak things to make sure the composition feels right, because we all instinctively, even if you're not, you know, a trained artist, we all instinctively relate to a composition. We know when something's off, and you might not know why it's off. So the picture cannot be off. It has to feel right. And also, again, you're trying to convey emotions, because often you're trying to convey the emotion you feel when you're creating a piece of art, or the emotion that comes across from that view, what you're seeing. So the painting is like very different from a photograph. And the good photographers anyway have to, in a sense, work with some of these issues themselves. In fact, I used to work many years ago as a journalist, and I would have to take, as a journalist, you have to be able to use a camera. And I realized how helpful that was for me when I became an artist, because I've already learned to sort of frame things, and you're thinking in terms of how the picture will look, not in terms of a superficial level, but so it feels right. And that's the best way of putting it.